Welcome to the Farm Family Harmony podcast. I'm Elaine Fraze, Farm Family Coach, here with another episode full of transition tips, tactics, and sometimes hard truths to get harmony on your farm. Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Farm Family Harmony podcast. And it's my delight and pleasure today to talk to someone who I've followed for a very long time and does amazing work with farm families and other families in business. So welcome, Lance Woodbury.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Just want to say at the very front of this, and at the end, we'll put your website up as well, but your dispatch newsletter that I've been getting for quite a while, it comes chock full of resources, and our desire in this podcast is to give practical tools and resources to farm families to help them find harmony through understanding. So to get started, who is Lance Woodbury and where do you hail from?
Yeah, so I am from Kansas in the States, and my family farmed in western Kansas and kind of right on the central and mountain time zone line. But my father chose not to farm. So I actually grew up during the school years in the inner city in Kansas City, Kansas, in a pretty rough neighborhood, and then would go in the summers out to the family farm in western Kansas. And just to cut to the quick of it, I lived with my grandparents, who lived right between two uncles who farmed right next to each other, but hadn't spoken to each other for 20 years.
Right, and that's why your articles on rules of estrangement and fault lines and family fragmentation are two things that I think people should reach out for, because you experienced that as a young person, and I think going to Grandma Dad's farm was probably a little piece of heaven for you compared to life in the inner city.
It was, yeah.
And so fast forward to today, Lance, what are you doing today?
So that whole experience, Elaine, sort of set me on a path to helping family businesses, and as I did that over the years at what is now Pinion, which was Keiko Isom and earlier Kennedy and Co., an accounting firm, really set me on a path to trying to help families. And eventually I narrowed to get back to working with just families in agriculture. So I had done broader business things, but along the way got a master's in conflict analysis and resolution, and also an MBA to sort of focus on both the sort of soft side of family business as well as the business strategy side.
I don't think conflict is ever soft, Lance.
That's true.
Right. That's true. And I think you and I are kind of woven of the same cloth in terms of understanding how our faith view also integrates with models of forgiveness and wanting people to come to that sense of peace and harmony. Mm-hmm. And I'm an eternal optimist. I'm wired for positivity. So one of the quotes that has been workable in my work over the last couple of decades is Peter Drucker's quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So give us some framework. That's what I'd like to focus on in our conversation today, is how you determine what families truly believe. How do you determine their behavior, and how do you find out whether or not their decision-making is helpful? So I've kind of drilled that culture eats strategy for breakfast quote into belief, behavior, and decision-making.
Yeah. And I would actually adapt, if I could, Drucker's quote a little bit for the family business and say principles eat strategy for breakfast. Yeah, and what I mean by that is, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you're not really clear about both what you're trying to believe as well as the cultural piece, how you're going to behave in the business, it sort of doesn't matter what strategy you choose. And here's a good example. If family harmony is a goal, or family working together is a goal, but your strategy to do that is to give everybody an equal slice of the pie, then you're probably not going to get what you want. The principle of people working well together and being a good family isn't accomplished with a strategy that equally divides everything in a farming operation where we have off-farm heirs. So you've got to really focus on what you want to believe, and then sort of say, how does the strategy map to those principles? How does the strategy map to the culture we're trying to create in our family? There's lots of examples of people who adopt estate planning strategies that actually run counter to what their culture is as
what
a
they
family,
truly
because
want.
it's driven by the tax side of it, or it's driven by the legal side of it, but it doesn't match what the family's really trying to achieve. But they get caught up in, oh, we need to minimize tax, or we need to do things. And I'm not saying that's not important, but it's all a balance and trying to figure out how do we make sure we think about how those twin pieces of culture or principles and strategy go together and really accomplish the whole picture. And oftentimes that comes because advisors aren't collaborating as a group. We don't have everybody in the room together. The wealth management folks and the attorneys and the accountants and the family business consultants, I mean, all need to be in the room helping the family achieve what it is they express.
And what's the resistance to having your team of advisors all in the room at one time, Lance? Because I've had family meetings where I've had the accountant sitting at my right hand, or I've had the lawyer on the left, and those to me are much more efficient. And I know there's a lot of, billable hours in the room,
Yeah.
but isn't that a really sweet spot to be in, where everybody's contributing with their own expertise at the same time?
Yeah, no, I mean it's really the best way. And what happens if that's not there is the client, the customer, the farm family ends up trying to translate between these different professions, and each has their own jargon and language, and they kind of know each other's stuff, the accountants and attorneys and wealth managers. But if they're not all in the room, then the family is trying to deliver those messages between the advisors, and it just gets, it's like the game of telephone. I mean, it just gets very inefficient, and sometimes they're working at cross purposes. I think what gets in the way of that sometimes are the sort of protection of each advisor's sphere of work or influence, as well as some egos, like who's running
Yeah,
the show.
in Canada, we call that turf.
Turf, yeah, there you
Protecting
go.
their turf somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
So Lance, what's one of the most powerful questions that you ask the family as you're getting to know them and navigating where the pieces of conflict might be? How do you get really clear very quickly on what their culture actually looks like?
Um, what their culture actually looks like.
Well,
I
in terms of what
think
they
about that.
believe,
Yeah,
undercovering whether or not there is that disconnect between
yeah.
wanting to have tax efficiency in their estate plan, and yet, binding the hands of the successor with trusts and things that aren't very flexible in the future.
Yeah, I would say, well, one of the ways I get there is I sometimes, and I do this when I am speaking, but I put up examples of principles and I have them react to those, because sometimes it's hard if you just say, hey, give me your guiding
Right.
principles for
No.
the future of the family business. I'll
Right.
say, hey, is it important that every one of your kids has the opportunity to come back, or is it more important that the business has a place and that those kids meet certain qualifications to be able to come back? Which principle is more important? And I don't even necessarily, I mean, I certainly have my thoughts about which will promote the success of the business and the family, but I try to say from a more neutral place, what's most important to you, and give them examples of, is avoiding all estate tax most important, or is giving some of your money to charity most important, or is paying a manageable amount of estate tax important? I mean, what sort of giving them a chance to poke holes in different statements and say, no, this is what we truly believe. I would say that the question I asked to try and prioritize some of those things, Elaine, I actually not really, I don't know if stealing is the right word, but as consultants, we're always borrowing questions and quotes from other consultants. Yeah, and affirming. And
validating.
so I went through the strategic coach program,
Oh,
and
good.
which
Okay.
you would know about. And
Yes.
one of the questions that Dan Sullivan sort of came up with is, if we were meeting here 3 years from now, what would have to happen both personally and professionally, for you to feel successful? And by
Great
by
question.
sort of putting people 3 years ahead and looking back and saying what had to happen over that 3 years. If we imagine, it's 2026 and we're looking back over that period of time, what has to happen for you to feel like you've made progress as a family? And
I think if
that future oriented question really gets them to prioritize, hey, this is what's most important to us.
it's also giving them a target of what success looks like. And one of my coaches, Lydia Carpenter, who has a master's as well, she uses it and she compresses it a little bit, Lance, when we're in the coaching process. And she said, as we go through this coaching process, what would it look like in 3 months that you were having success?
Yeah.
So it's what you said. The bottom line is your future orientation to know what you're working towards, right? And quite often when I ask a farm family in our introductory comments about what is it they want for the future, they just go, I don't know. I
Yeah.
said, well, that's what we're going to unpack, because how do we know that we're going to have success unless we know what we're aiming for?
Yeah. And it's sort of an indicator if you get a family or family members that can only talk about the past and
Right.
what went on there. And it's sometimes, the whole point of that diagnosis is to think about what interventions with the family when we're working with them will be most effective. And so if they're stuck on the pain of the past, and maybe some mediation or reconciliation around a particular past situation is needed before we can talk about the future.
And that's why I enjoy your writing so much, Lance, because you really, I have my bull here, discuss the undiscussable, the tough things that families are avoiding. And recently, you wrote about the rules of estrangement and also the book Fault Lines, which I read, by the way. And I bet I've given out your PDF of those articles at least 10 times already, because it's a trend that we're seeing in agriculture, right? Just like your uncles, being in the middle of the farm with your grandfather and the uncles not speaking to each other, living side by side. And my hashtag is healing stories #4 ag, because I'm tired. I'm pretty sure you are too. You don't want to hear any more of those sad stories. You want to hear what created the healing story. So my question is, how do you comment? How do you work in those pain points of families that are stuck in the past? And again, another powerful question, or what kind of conflict resolution do you do so that there can be reconciliation and forgiveness and letting go of the past so that they can actually move forward?
I often will frame a question with a family. Well, first of all, getting a family to sit down and talk about the family is a big first step. And what I mean by that is, if we think about what we typically call in the industry as the 3 systems of family business,
which I have
the family, family, management, and business, or ownership, lots of different ways to do that. But if you just keep your focus on the family circle for a second and talk about things like, what do we hope for as a family? What kind of relationships do we want as a family? What are those things that orient us toward the future? And then the question that, with a background in conflict resolution, I was, academically trained in mediation. And so there's a whole process to that. But at the end of the day, the question that I have developed, sort of like Dan Sullivan's question that I often ask, is what do you need to see or what do you need to hear from the other person in order to feel good about your relationship? What do you need to see or what do you need to hear? And the see involves behavior. So there's behavioral change that needs to happen. And the hear involves an admission, an apology, an expression of love. I don't know, what it is, but I ask, what do you need to see or hear in order to feel good about the future with this person? And that gets people sort of saying, well, if we're going to move forward, I need this, or I need to hear that. And, there's lots of tools out there, but I default ultimately to that question to try and get people to articulate what they need from another.
And I think what you're mirroring to, Lance, is Dr. Gary Chapman, who wrote the famous book, The 5 Love Languages.
Yeah.
His one on conflict is when saying sorry is not enough. And so his question is, what do I need to do to make things right? and see and hear is very powerful, because obviously you want to see a change in behavior. Most people do. And for some people, the apology and hearing, the ask, will you forgive me? Or I apologize for making an assumption, and I will, correct that in the future. And I hope I can prove that to you by the way,
Yeah.
by the way I behave. So again, that, coming out of the mouth, kind of what the principles are that you talked about, and then obviously seeing that change in behavior. So how,
I would just, if I could add real quick, that,
yeah.
the timing has a lot, in agriculture, we say timing has a lot to do with the outcome of a rain dance. So if you're dancing at the right time, maybe, but it works that way in conflict resolution in families too. There is an element of timing, meaning there is a time where that window opens and there's a shot at reconciliation. What I would say though, in estrangement, the lesson from several books on estrangement in families is the longer you wait,
Yeah.
the harder it is. People get used to being in conflict, or they get used to being out of touch with family members. And I would even say, I think my two uncles got comfortable with the conflict and got
Yeah.
comfortable not talking. And at some point, they reconciled before one of them passed away here a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And it took a big effort by one of those uncles to go to the other and say, look,
Reach out.
we messed up. I messed up. Will you forgive me? And then they spent their last 5 years of one of the uncles' lives, doing things together, which was really, I mean, at the end of the day, the acres, the dollars, none of that's going to matter.
No.
None of that's going to matter. It's
You're not
relational and spiritual questions that
newsflash,
people are worried about.
you're not taking it with you, right? Exactly.
Right. So it's relationships and spiritual questions that people are worried about at the end. And estrangement, unfortunately, sort of delays those questions. And so the quicker you can get to dealing with estrangement, whether it's a letter to someone or whether it's just simply going to a birthday party and making eye contact and see, whatever the little steps are that get us moving back towards some sort of connection to one another, don't wait.
I think birthday parties and farm families are highly explosive, more
Yeah.
powerful than the sparkler on the cake.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness, the amount of coaching I've done with, and this happened, and this happened, and they didn't talk to me, and da 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 da, and I'm going, whoa, how did you show up? And John Gottman has a great book too, on 7 principles for making marriage work, and one of the chapters is make quick repair, and I think that's what you're saying, Lance, in different words, is, and my training in conflict resolution and mediation too, we used to go like this and spread our arms apart and make this big spread, and the deeper and the wider the spread gets, the more difficult it is to pull the energy together to get to that reconciliation. But what I loved about one of the chapters in Fault Lines is the question, do you wish or do you choose to be a reconciler? And this little girl walked in the kitchen with her uncles and her dad, and she said, look, you two, stop behaving like this, because my cousins and I in the other room, we want to stay cousins. So whatever's wrong between you, you get this fixed by Tuesday.
Yeah.
I like that
Pretty
story.
powerful.
No, I like that story because she was direct. She asked for what she needed and she put a timeline on it. By Tuesday, you're going to get this fixed.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when we talk about culture, eating strategy, or what people believe. And my last piece of this podcast, Lance, is to share your expertise on decision-making models that you've seen, and how you, as you get to know the family and you've reconciled or talked about the pain of the past, and you've got them looking forward to what they want to see success as 3 years going out, how do you help coach them and facilitate more robust awareness of how they're actually making decisions?
One of the tendencies in families, because we have this historical relationship and know each other from a very early age, is to shortcut the decision-making process, because we assume we know how other people what they want, or how they're going to make decisions, or what they would say, or my brother is going to say this, my mom's going to say that. And one of the things I try and do is get in the middle of that and sort of take them through a process of reflection, meaning what do we each think about whatever decision that we have in front of us, which could be anything from estate plans to buying a tractor or a piece of farm equipment or something. What do we each think about that? Then what do we each believe about that? What's our knowledge about that? And getting them to share that in a group, which again feels, as a family, it feels inefficient because we've been together all this time. We should know. We shouldn't have to sit around the
You
table.
should just know.
Yeah, and talk about this. And then planning. In other words, now that we know what we each think and we're developing some view of that decision, what's our plan? Are we gonna finance it? Are we gonna buy it? Are we gonna do it tomorrow? Are we gonna do it next week? How are we gonna step through this and then put it into play and then repeat that circle? And I think that works not only for boards of more formal family businesses, but works informally in the decision-making process too. But because we're family, we tend to skip turning I knowledge into we knowledge. We tend to just say, hey, we all know what we think. Somebody make a decision. Well, so somebody makes a decision, but invariably they didn't spend time checking in with one another, and somebody resents that decision. And they may not say anything, but those resentments build up, and then all of a sudden we blow up, and or we quit going to meetings because we don't feel like,
or we stop talking.
Yeah.
Right. And the silent treatment. So Lance, this has been very powerful, and I love the statement, let's turn the I knowledge into we knowledge. So just as we wrap up here, you also wrote an article on sacrifice, and I wanted to let listeners know about that. And I think if they just Google Lance Woodbury, the double-edged sword of sacrifice. I've actually had farm clients say, Elaine, we've had it tough, so they have to have it tough. Yeah. And I'm going, oh my goodness, where is that written? That just because we've gone through the high interest rates of the 80s, or that we've had hail or drought or all these sideswipes in agriculture, where is it written that the next generation has to suffer? Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think sacrifice is, the idea of sacrificial behavior is usually a positive force.
For the good of all.
Right, for the good of all. However, when it becomes, hey, you need to sacrifice compensation, or you need to sacrifice family time, or you need to sacrifice, sort of making people sacrifice those same ways that we had to. Every generation sacrifices a little bit differently, is what I would say. And every generation sort of sees the issue of sacrifice differently, and making someone go through economic sacrifice because I went through it. Maybe we need to think about how to help them understand economic sacrifice, but talk about what other sacrifices are they going to need to go through, or will they have to face as they try and grow this business.
And I think that's really damaging, Lance, for young farm families who are longing to also nurture that family circle, and the farm becomes a monster, and it's always the farm first at the sacrifice and the expense of what the family needs. Right. So really appreciate your time today. And you mentioned compensation, and just because this is also going on video, how to ask for better compensation.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Is my latest article that just came out in Grain News, and people can go to my website at farmfamilycoach.com and sign up for my newsletter. And how do they find you, Lance?
The best place to find all my articles and books and those kinds of things is at lancewoodbury.com. So that's, my last name is Woodbury. So just lancewoodbury.com, and you can sign up for the dispatch, for the Faith and Family Business newsletter. You can see the books, the articles, All Right and Progressive Farmer, everything's there. And you have a great voice for radio. Thank you. My dad was a minister. That's why we moved to the inner city. Oh, okay. So people accuse me of preaching sometime. Well, and you and I also share a bit of that story, because I'm sitting in the minister's office. My office is my father-in-law's office. My father-in-law, Abe Fraze, was the pastor of the Boys Vein Church for 27 years. And so, neat. Yeah. So we have that journey too. Anyway, it's been delightful to spend this time with you. I hope the listeners will remember some of those key phrases. Let's turn the I into we, not make assumptions. And again, just really be careful about not letting those conflicts go too long. So we'll hope to have you on the podcast again, Lance, and wish you all the best in your practice. And
that's a wrap today for us. We hope you've enjoyed it, and find out more about farmfamilycoach.com by going there. And we have a big announcement coming soon, so stay posted for that. We're going to have ways to have more intimate time with you on a regular basis. So we'll sign off now. And remember, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So pay attention to what you believe, what principles you're working with, how you're behaving, and let's turn those decisions into we decisions, not assumptions. See you next time. I've created an online membership called the Farm Family Transition Membership, Your Path to Harmony. It's a path to seamless farm transitions without the turmoil, legal complexities, and family fights. So sign up today for the founding membership waitlist, which is at elainefraise.com/membership. And if you can't spell Elaine Fraise, it's ELAINEFROESE.com. And again, it's at elainefraise.com/membership. And be ready to start after harvest. See you soon.